So these are some additional notes that might help you with the intro section. You can add these notes to your spiral notebook. Remember, your spiral notebook has to be handwritten, so you can handwrite these into your spiral notebook if you feel like they would help you. So one thing is, what symbol is used to start every calculation in Excel? Every calculation in Excel must start with an equal sign. So if you wanted to do the sum, you would do equals sum, and then whatever you wanted to do, E2 to E7. If you wanted to just write an equation, you would do equals C3 times D3, but you always have to start with that equal sign. So a variable, a constant, or a parameter input. So variables are things that would change on a regular basis, like how many sodas were purchased or how many people came to the concert. A constant is something that never changes, like the interest rate, so that would be your percentage. A parameter is something that usually doesn't change very often, like how much does a ticket cost or how much does a soda cost. So you might change that maybe from game to game, but you wouldn't necessarily change that from person to person. So a parameter, the example of that would be the cost. The constant would be the tax rate. That's something that's not going to change very often. And the variable would be the number of items purchased. Okay, so we already talked about this. When you fill a column down, what part of the cell reference changes? So when we fill a column down, that means the row number is changing. The row number is changing. So for example, it would be C3 here and it would be C7 here because you filled it down. When you fill across, when you fill something across, sorry, and I filled across, say from C3 across, then that means the letter is going to change, because that represents the column. So it would be C3 and then maybe D3, E3, F3. So this would be like F3. When you fill to the right, that's what we were talking about here, it would go from like C3 to F3. So that means, again, the letter is changing. Okay, so the next thing, what would these calculations do? So this calculation would add cell E5, whoops, that's an E, E5 plus E7 plus E9. Okay, so it would only add those three cells. Whereas this one, because of the colon, would add E5 plus E6 plus E7 plus E8 plus E9. So you could write it, the second one is easiest to write it using the sum option. The first one, you could do it either way. It'd be about the same. The max, it's going to give you the maximum value between E5 and E9. So it's going to compare E5 to E6 to E7 to E8 to E9 and find the maximum value. D, the count for E5 and E9 is going to be 2. Okay? If E5 and E9 have values. So it only adds a count if there's something in the cell. So it's going to count E5 and E9 and see how many things are there. This one is going to count E5, E6, E7, E8, and E9. So it could be 5 if there are values in all 5 cells. Oops, sorry. Okay, so the next thing, what about naming a cell, bar graphs, things like this in the awful charts? So let's go and look at a spreadsheet and talk about those. So when we name a cell, an example here where we named a cell, this value right here, if you'll notice up here in the top left-hand corner, we called this the tax rate. So when we name it, all you have to do is click on the cell that you want to name and then come up here to the corner and name it. So type in a name for it. So if I wanted to call this the total, I could call it total right there. So now if I want to refer to this cell, I can refer to it as the total. It didn't take. Okay. So if I want to refer to that cell, I can refer to it as the total. So notice right here what happened is when I did my calculation, I didn't say H9 times E9. I did tax rate times subtotal. So it makes more sense when I'm looking at my problem to use the naming system. It also is very beneficial if I have a large number of values that I need to, large number of spreadsheets and things like that. If I name the cells, it just makes it so much easier and I don't have to worry about cell referencing, which we're going to talk about later. So the next thing, bar charts and stacked bar charts. We talked about this a little bit earlier. So this is an example of a bar graph and this is a stacked bar graph. So the difference is that, for example, this is representing one set of data. It's only representing the soda revenues, whereas this is representing the hot dog revenues for the 3 different concerts. So when you look at a stacked bar, it sort of gives you an idea of which concert used the most water. So for example, concert 1 doesn't seem to have as much water usage as concert 3 because you can see the size of the bar. So then we have a bar graph and a histogram, and there's a big difference between the two. So here we have soda revenues for concert 1, 2, and 3, and here we have a histogram of soda revenues. So what you'll notice is that the histogram is set up where I've set it up so that my bins, this is called a bin, is $7 wide. So this one's $7 and this one's $7. So when I look at my soda revenues, I have 2 sodas, 2 concerts, 53 and 56, that had soda revenues in the $50 to $60 range. And then I had 1 concert where the soda revenues were in the $60 to $67 range. So a histogram in this case doesn't represent information as well as a bar graph. So you have to be careful about the difference between the two of those. And the last thing is to talk about awful charts. So an awful chart is if I come into my chart and I just sort of add every single feature that I can add to it just because I think that more is better. And what happens is you end up getting a graph that's much too confusing, almost impossible to read, because you've got too much data in there. So you have to be really careful about having what they call awful charts. Sometimes keeping it simpler is better, but at the same time, make sure that your horizontal axis is labeled, your vertical axis is labeled, you have percentages when you can. Like in the case of the pie graph, make sure, for example, that the different colors are represented so that there's no confusion about what you're looking at. So that's the information that we have here for our notes on the intro. I hope this has been helpful. One other thing I wanted to say about the Excel, This bar here is what they refer to as the formula bar, and that's where your formulas will show up. So if we ever talk about the formula bar, that's what they're talking about. So again, I hope this was helpful, and good luck as you go along.